To help break it down. Alex Traiman is the CEO and Jerusalem bureau chief at the Jewish News Syndicate. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us here today.
Josh, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, the big question here, I did want to get your take overall. Do we have the information about exactly how Sinwar was located by the IDF and other Israeli officials? Do we know if they had intelligence or anything of that nature, or is that all a big question mark at this point?
Well, unlike the assassination of Hamas leader Mohammed Deif or Hezbollah leader Nasrallah in southern Lebanon, this time Israel did not have any intelligence on where Yahya Sinwar was. There was operations going on in the area of Rafah, not very intensive operations, not that many soldiers in the area, but they did come under fire from a building. They returned fire, and sure enough, when they identified who was killed, one of the soldiers said, "This looks like it could be Yahya Sinwar." They weren't sure. If anybody's seen the photos of his killing, they were pretty gory. It was hard to tell, but then they were able to confirm using dental records and DNA that it was Yahya Sinwar.
Was there maybe any concern there among Israelis, among anyone, that this might not actually be him once they did all the testing?
Well, Yahya Sinwar was in Israeli prison for 23 years, which means that Israel had its own dental records and DNA on Yahya Sinwar, and they were able to conclusively confirm it. And it seems as though Hamas leaders also confirming that Sinwar is dead. So there was a tremendous joy and celebration yesterday on the first day of the Sukkot festival here in Israel. People celebrating, of course, the killing of Israel's arch enemy.
Many people have heard that name, Yahya Sinwar, but are not necessarily familiar with who he was. So can you help break down a little bit more about his history and what we know about him overall? Most people just know he's essentially the mastermind behind October 7th.
That's right. He was in charge of the operations inside Gaza. He's essentially the Osama bin Laden of Gaza. He actually had been sitting in Israeli prison on multiple consecutive life sentences. He was in Israeli jail for 23 years for the killing of 2 Israelis. He's also been known to kill several Gazans, and that was also part of his case. But he was released in 2011 as part of a prisoner release deal. 1,000 prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, in exchange for a single Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, probably one of the worst deals that Israel's ever turned in its history, and proves why you should not and never negotiate with terrorists. They did that, and you see what happens when people come out of Israeli jail for terrorism. They go back to terrorism.
Is there any concern right now that Hamas could retaliate for the death of Sinwar? Is that a possibility? Are folks thinking about that just yet?
Well, Hamas's capabilities have been almost completely degraded. Sinwar was one of the last remaining senior leaders of Hamas. There's very few rockets remaining in Gaza that have not yet already been fired at Israel. And in fact, the threat to the home front of Israel has been actually neutralized since October 8th, the day after the initial attack. So I think that there's very little at this point that Hamas can do to Israel to retaliate for this killing. And I think that fact, more than just the death of Sinwar, makes it more likely at some point that you could get a full Hamas surrender and a declared end to the war in Gaza.
That was my next question for you here. Do you think that this is really going to have an overall impact on the Gaza war, or is it kind of too soon to tell?
Well, Israel has demolished 24 to 25 of the battalions that exist, the organized battalions of Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. But when you talk about destroying a battalion, according to the IDF, that means 50% killed or incapacitated such that they can't fight. But what that could mean is that over 40% of the fighters across all of these battalions still are running around the Gaza Strip, and they have been reorganizing. There's no more direct command, top-down command, but many of these newly formed or renewed battalions are operating under their own leadership. And what that means is that either they could see that the war is over and they may lay down their arms and hopefully return the hostages, but they may also just be operating on their own, trying to be in localized strongmen in the Strip. And Israel may still have to go a long way to to find and deal with each one of these terror cells as they continue to operate and reorganize inside the Gaza Strip.
What do Palestinians overall think of Sinwar? What was their overall impression of him?
Well, those that support the destruction of the state of Israel were obviously very proud of him. But there are many Gazans that recognize that Sinwar brought death and destruction to the Gaza Strip. If it wasn't for his masterminding the October 7th attack, life in Gaza would have gone on the way it was. But instead, he masterminded the worst massacre in Israeli history. And now the Gazan people are going to pay for that for probably for decades. So there was a lot of hatred inside the Gaza Strip for Hamas and for Yahya Sinwar. And the hope is that now with Sinwar's death and the impending defeat of Hamas, that the Gazan people will take on themselves a new local leadership that's not going to be committed to the destruction of Israel so they can rebuild their lives in peace and quiet.
And who's next? Do we know?
We don't know who's next inside the Gaza Strip. Hamas is not going to be next. The prime minister said yesterday in his address following the killing of Sinwar that today marks the beginning of the end of Hamas's rule in the Gaza Strip. There are a number of Western influences, including the Biden administration, that would like to see the Palestinian Authority take over the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority lost control of the Gaza Strip back in 2007, and they continue to fund terrorism inside Judea and Samaria. So Israel has said that the Palestinian Authority will not be the force that comes in to rule Gaza. So at this point, we don't know who will rule Gaza, but I think it's looking increasingly likely that the IDF and Israel will have a sustained presence in the Strip and may even take over the distribution of humanitarian aid in the Strip, just so that the Palestinian people understand that Hamas is no longer in charge. And if they want to get humanitarian aid, if they want to see rebuilding take place in the Strip, they're going to have to cooperate with the state of Israel.
As a journalist, I did want to ask you, do you have any question or questions about all of this right now? How Sinwar was killed, anything related to that? Do you have any questions that you hope the IDF, Israel, someone might answer?
Yes, the most important question is regarding the fate of the hostages. It was believed that Sinwar was surrounded by maybe dozens of remaining hostages inside the Gaza Strip. Intelligence came out yesterday suggesting that the six killed hostages just about a month ago, including American Hirsch Goldberg Poland. They were surrounding Yahya Sinwar, but he apparently gave the orders for them to be killed. And so we still don't know where some of the remaining hostages might be. We don't know if orders will be now to kill some of the hostages, if any are remaining, in retaliation for Sinwar's death. But Israel has offered a significant reward, both cash money and free passage out of the Gaza Strip to any members of any Gazan citizens that turn over information that leads to the release of hostages.
And there was word kind of circulating maybe just a few weeks ago that Sinwar had actually been offered some kind of deal where if he released the hostages, he could get out of Gaza essentially free, right?
Yes, the Israeli government had said that they were willing to discuss a ceasefire arrangement that would allow for the release of hostages and for the exile of Sinwar maybe to Qatar or to Turkey. And in fact, we saw that when Haniya was killed, Ismail Haniya was killed in an assassination in Tehran, that immediately Sinwar was named the Politburo chief of Hamas, which was sitting previously in Qatar. So it was believed that Sinwar was paving his exit out of the Strip. Instead, he chose to remain there to let fate play out as it might, and he met his death inside the Gaza Strip. It's definitely a big relief for the IDF and for Israel, and the hope that this somehow is one of the major dominoes that leads to the end of the war.
All right. Alex Traiman, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break down the latest here. Anything else that you want to add really about any of this before I let you go?
Well, we're seeing that the war is really turning its focus to the north. Israel's conducting much more intensive operations in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah is a much more powerful force than than Hamas ever was. Hezbollah is a much more powerful force than Hamas, and they're able to do significantly more damage to the Israeli home front than Hamas was able to do. And at the same time, we're right in this calm before the potential storm, which is an Israeli retaliation directly on Iran for sending 181 ballistic missiles at the state of Israel on October 1st. That was the largest ballistic missile strike in the history of warfare. And so there's no doubt that Israel will retaliate. The size and the scope and the timing of that retaliation remains unclear, as is what a potential response could be from Iran. So we're seeing now, with the death of Sinwar, maybe the closing of the first chapter of this war, or towards the closing, with the war against Hamas in Gaza, turning the attentions to phase 2, which is in the northern Lebanon, and now phase 3, which is Iran.
And before I let you go here, I do want to ask, because you brought up Iran, do you think that Sinwar's death will have any sort of impact on that retaliatory attack by Israel on Iran, or does everything kind of go still as planned?
I don't necessarily think that it makes too much of an impact with regard to how Iran is going to act or not act at this point. But for Iran, they're looking now at their terror proxies, and they see their junior proxy in Hamas completely degraded, without senior leadership, without any more capabilities to attack the state of Israel. They see their larger senior terror proxy, Hezbollah, now also significantly degraded, military capabilities to attack Israel reduced significantly. The senior leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah, taken out, and some of the other senior leadership taken out there as well. So, all of this capacity, this ring of fire that they've built for the last 20 years to attack the state of Israel, is being destroyed in a matter of months here by the IDF.
All right. Alex, thank you again for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Josh, thanks so much for having me.
All right. I do want to take you out to this live image that we